welcome back to the channel. It's been a while since I've been out in the car with you. It's been mostly doing bike stuff recently, but there was something I particularly wanted to cover in the car, and that's as a result of the increase in fuel prices. Mrs. Local went to fill her Mini up before and it was 70 odd quid to fill it up. It's never been that much before. It's nearly £2 a litre now in the UK, so to put that into context, that is, if you're in the US, in the US they're complaining about it going over $4, $4.50 a gallon, a US gallon. Actually, if you were paying our prices in the US, you'd be paying $9.50 per US gallon. So the cost of living is expensive. Everything else is going up in the shops. Cost of gas and electricity is going up. But we all still need to use our cars. We all still need to get about. So I thought I'd make a video just showing you a few little fuel saving tips. Just showing you how in your everyday driving, and I know there's a lot of enthusiasts follow this channel and it might not appeal to the enthusiasts, but there's a few little tips that are worth noting that will help you save a bit of fuel. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to crawl along. So let me give you my best fuel saving tips, driving tips. And the first one I'm going to talk about is start stop. So the first tip I'm going to give you is leave start stop switched on or off. Activated, leave it alone. So many people I see get in the car and immediately switch the start stop off. You can override it, you can switch it off. Oh, I don't like that. I don't like the engine cutting out at traffic lights. Don't like it. Well, let me tell you, I did a little bit of an experiment a few years ago, back when I had my BMW M135i. Not the most fuel efficient car, but I thought, let's just do an experiment around start stop and let's see how much of a difference it makes and try and keep everything else equal. So back then I was commuting regularly in the car, doing the same commute every day, and so I decided to do one tank full of fuel with start stop switched off, deactivated, and then the following tank of fuel I decided to reactivate it and use start stop on that journey. And I didn't change anything else, didn't change the routes, didn't change my commute, didn't change my driving style, drove in exactly the same style. And comparing those two tankfuls, I got 15% better fuel economy with the start stop switched on or activated. 15% is quite considerable. Think about why you don't like start stop switched on. You don't like the engine cutting out at the traffic lights. You might be old fashioned, you might think, well, the battery's not going to cut, the battery's going to go flat. Cars, modern cars, much more sophisticated than you might think. There's a huge battery in the boot for start stop operating cars. You can leave your air conditioning, your radio, your headlights on. It monitors the battery level. If at any point that battery level starts to drop, then the engine will kick back in again. So you're not doing any harm to the car by using it. I've never been caught out by it. There's a sort of feeling sometimes from some people that, well, it's going to leave me stranded at the lights. I'm going to press the clutch, put it into gear, and it's going to take ages to start and I'm going to be waiting to go. No, the way stop start works in a manual car is you need to come to a stop, put the car into neutral, and putting it into neutral will cut the engine. You can put the handbrake on if you like or not, keep your foot on the foot brakes, up to you. But by stopping the car and putting it into neutral, you've got to put it into neutral, the engine will cut out. The moment you press the clutch to put the car back into gear again, the engine will restart. So before you've even engaged gear, if your foot's gone down on the clutch, the engine will restart immediately and the car is ready to go. So you're not losing anything as far as, you know, getting stuck at traffic lights or anything like that. In an automatic car, you come to a stop in drive with your foot on the brake. As soon as the car's come to a stop, the engine will cut out, and then the moment that you take your foot off that brake pedal, the engine will kick back in again immediately and you'll drive away. So you're not losing anything, you're not waiting for that engine to start up. It's not like you've stalled at the traffic lights or anything like that, and I think that's why some people don't like it. So use your start stop. And there's a few other little technical stuff you can use in the car as well. If you've got it, put the car into its efficient setting. In this car, in the Mini, it's called green setting. In other cars you'll see it's called eco setting. And what it effectively does, or what it feels like it's doing, is it's really lengthening the travel of the accelerator pedal. So you need to press the accelerator pedal much further to get a considerable throttle opening on the engine. Effectively, it's being very gentle with the throttle for you. It's taking all the work out of it. It's doing the things that I'm going to describe to you in a minute that you can do in your own car. So if you've got a green setting, use it. That will help you save some fuel. For the purposes of the rest of this video, I'm going to take it out of that and I'm going to show you driving techniques that will replicate what that system does. The other thing you can do is have your miles per gallon setting on your dashboard so that you can see what impact your driving is having on your miles per gallon at that time. Now you can either do that as an average or you can do it as an immediate. An immediate will just tell you at this moment in time what miles per gallon you're doing roughly. Now I don't want you driving along staring at it, but you will notice, especially if you put it in the instant miles per gallon setting, what a difference a small movement in the throttle pedal has on the efficiency of the car and the fuel economy of the car. So use the settings that you've got in the car to help you get the best fuel economy. And the next tip I'm going to give you is that you should use small throttle openings and low revs as much as you possibly can. This might sound glaringly obvious, but the harder you press the accelerator and the wider you open the throttle on the engine, the more fuel you're going to use. So the big killer of fuel economy in any car is accelerating. The more you accelerate the car and the harder you accelerate the car, the more fuel you're going to use. Once the car's up to speed and in a higher gear, they're pretty efficient. You can maintain the speed of the car with very small throttle openings. And above everything else, the one thing that really kills your miles per gallon is setting off from stationary. So in a moment I'm going to talk about maintaining momentum and trying to avoid coming to a complete stop if you can do. But before we get to that, let's look at small throttle openings. What that means is you're going to use the gearbox in a different way. Now, if you've watched some of my other videos, you know I'll encourage you to use the revs of the engine, to use maximum performance, rev it in each gear. If you're looking to save fuel, you need to change your driving style. So in this car, which is a 2-litre petrol, looking at keeping the revs below 2000 for whatever speed I'm doing. And in doing so, I'm using very, very small, very gentle throttle movements. I'm only ever using the top, maybe the first 5% of the throttle when I'm driving, if I'm trying to save fuel. Anything more than that 5% of the throttle travel, you'll find that you're starting to really eat into your miles per gallon figure and it starts to drop dramatically. And at the same time as using small, low throttle openings, I'm changing up to the highest gear possible. So that's helping me to keep the engine revs down, which means to maintain the speed that I've chosen. At the moment we're doing 30 miles an hour down here. And because it's downhill, I'm not using any throttle movements, but actually to do that, it's going to be very, very small throttle movements. So the less time you spend on that accelerator pedal and the less you press it, the smaller amount that you press it and the less revs that you use, the better your fuel economy figure is going to be. Now, I've already mentioned the next tip, that's maintaining momentum. You're going to use more fuel setting off from stationary than at any other time. So if we can avoid coming to a stop and just keep the car moving, even if it's just at slow speeds, at low speeds, it's going to really help improve your fuel economy. So to do that, what you're going to have to do is use all the good observation techniques that you'll see in some of my other videos. Long forward observations, good planning, working out what you're going to need to do before you get there. Working out, for instance, that I'm just going to have to roll down to this blue car because of the oncoming white car, and I'm avoiding stopping, just keeping rolling in gear before moving out to pass it, instead of driving up to it, stopping and then setting off in first gear. So a more fuel efficient way is to just roll up to things, and by using good long forward observations you'll spot those opportunities and you'll roll up to things rather than coming to a complete stop. Another good tip is to think about how gravity affects your fuel economy and how gravity can help you or hinder you. So here, for instance, going uphill, I need a wider throttle opening to maintain my momentum up the hill. And this can be a crippler when you're on the motorway and you know, you get a bit of momentum coming down a hill, but then as soon as you get an uphill stretch, you're having to press that throttle harder to keep the car moving uphill. Well, let me give you a tip there. Don't ease off. Lose a little bit of speed on the uphills if you need to on the motorway. One of the good tips about trying to drive economically is don't use cruise control. because cruise control will maintain an average speed. It'll stick you on a speed and it'll maintain that speed, and it'll do everything it needs to do to maintain that speed. So it will open the gas for you, and it'll do it quite early, and it'll open the gas quite wide, and you won't realise how wide it's opening the throttle because you're not feeling it through the pedal. So instead of using cruise control, when you get an uphill run on a motorway or on a long uphill run that you've got to run up to, you know, on the motorway, start that hill at 70, let it just bleed a little bit of speed off on the way up. That means you're not having to open the throttle just as much. They say, I don't want you letting it get down to a real crawl. We don't want to drop below about 55, 60. But you can let it roll a little bit of speed off and you'll improve your fuel economy. Gravity can also be your friend. When we're on a downhill run, especially, my next tip is to coast in gear. That means leave the car in gear, come off the gas completely and let it coast downhill. So when a car is coasting downhill in gear, it's using virtually no fuel whatsoever. It's just mostly air that's going into the engine. And it's the compression of that air that's helping to hold the speed of the vehicle on the hill as well. So use that. Even if you want to change down to a lower gear and the revs go up, you're still not using really any fuel at all. Use that acceleration sense, that decelerative effect of being in a lower gear on a hill to hold you on the hill rather than braking. Braking really is the killer of fuel economy. The more you slow down, the more you have to speed up again. So coming back to my previous point, maintaining momentum as much as you can is going to help you save fuel. Once you are up to speed, I'm up to about 45 miles an hour here, it's a 50 limit, I'm in 6th gear, I'm using a very, very tiny amount of throttle to keep the speed where it is, and my instant miles per gallon there is, well, it's hovering between 70 and 90 miles to the gallon. So I'm completely off the gas. And then to maintain my speed through the corners, all I'm doing is squeezing the gas very gently. Very gently, a tiny amount on the gas there. Now if you're doing a motorway run, or you're doing a long run on a trunk road, main A roads, you've got to remember the effect that air resistance has on the car, and air resistance is significant once you get above certain speeds. You'll notice that fuel economy figures, quite often the best fuel economy figures for cars come about 55 miles an hour, and that's because above that speed the air resistance becomes much more significant. The air resistance goes up exponentially with the speed of the vehicle, and so you'll probably find that a speed like 70 miles an hour on the motorway isn't the most fuel efficient speed. You drop it to 55 to 60, I'm going to say 60 because we don't want to upset the lorry drivers amongst you. They're on their 56 mile an hour speed limiter, and there's nothing worse in a lorry than coming up behind somebody who's doing 55, just holding you back that little bit. So in a car, if you're looking at the most efficient speed, I would suggest about 60 miles an hour. You'll see some other tips. You might look around YouTube, look on the internet, and see some other tips from people who are into hypermiling, getting the maximum amount of fuel economy from the cars. Some of those tips get a bit extreme, so be careful where you take your advice from. You know, advice like slipstreaming lorries, where you drive just a couple of feet from the back of a lorry and get drawn along by the slipstream of the lorry. Yes, that means that you're virtually using no fuel as you're driving along, but there's a real, as you can imagine, there's a real risk with that, and it's not something that I advocate at all. Some smaller little changes you can make as well. You know, make starting the engine the last thing that you do. Don't get in the car. You don't need to warm cars up anymore. Even on a cold day, you don't need to warm them up. Driving it at normal road speeds for the first couple of miles will warm the car up nicely. So you don't need to get in and warm it up. You know, get in the car, get your seatbelt on, get the kids fastened in, get everything else sorted. Then just before you're ready to set off, start the car. So the engine's running, you know, for the minimum amount of time. Avoid that idling. When it comes to manoeuvring, use minimum revs when you're manoeuvring. Don't rev it and slip the clutch. Just tickle it around, move the car slowly, use minimum revs. And then as soon as you stopped, turn the engine off. Before you do anything else, turn the engine off. So again, you're only using the motor, you're only using the engine for the amount of time that you're actually needing it to drive the car. And one other little tip, That sounds a bit odd, this. I feel it doesn't have anything to do with fuel economy. Drive within the speed limits. Maybe not to the extreme that this chap trickling along at 20 and the 30 limit is doing, but you keep your speed reasonable and accelerate very gradually. Again, you're driving in the sweet spot where you'll minimise the amount of fuel that you're using. So be aware what the speed limits are. Don't blast around town well above the speed limits. A, you're putting people at risk by doing that in built-up areas, especially where it's a hazard-rich environment. B, you're more likely to get caught speeding because that's where the enforcement takes place. But actually, you'll keep your fuel economy low because all you're doing is racing to the next set of traffic lights and stopping and waiting, aren't you? So I'm just going to drive for a couple of minutes now using those techniques just to show you how we're putting them into place and how we're trying to reduce the amount of fuel that we're using. So downhill here in 4th gear, I'm actually going to change up to 5th gear now. Just wary of this ambulance on the bridge. Just checking the mirrors and moving away from it. Remember, I want to maintain momentum. So I'm in 5th gear going downhill, 30 miles an hour, very low revs, only about 1200 revs. And then I'm just going to try and maintain a little bit of momentum for the next hill. There is a change in speed limit up to 40. I'm not in a rush to increase my speed up to 40. I'll keep the car in 5th. It's a very good torquey motor in this Mini. But I'm going to wait for the hill to just level off before I start letting the speed build up towards that 40 mile an hour speed limit. And with a tiny throttle movement, tiny pressure on the throttle, less than 5%, we're just increasing our speed very gradually. And then change up to 6th gear. Again, the revs are down to about 1300 revs at the moment. And once we're up to speed, up to the speed that we want to do, just a tiny little bit of constant pressure on the accelerator just to maintain speed. And the instant miles per gallon is showing about 88, 86, 88 miles per gallon there, 37 miles an hour in 6th gear. So I'm looking well ahead. I can see the road dropping down, so I can put a little bit of speed on, have a little bit in hand to put on downhill, let it get up to 40. And then on the uphill section, I might just let it lose just 2 or 3 miles an hour just as we go up. That way I'm not having to press the gas hard, and even on the steepest part of that little hill then didn't drop below 50 miles an hour average. Remember, it's a 2-litre turbo petrol car, but we can still get reasonable gas mileage, as the Americans call it. We can still get reasonable fuel economy out of it. So I'm gently braking now. Now I've got a junction coming up. I can see the car stopping over there, so it may well be that we can go. Unfortunately not. On this occasion, we're going to have to come to a stop. So nice smooth stop, handbrake and neutral, and then foot off the clutch, and the stop start kicks in. So quite happy sitting here, not using any fuel sitting here at all. And I'm not going to go for the gear until I can see that those lights are about to change or are starting to change. So as the lights change, I'll press the clutch. That'll start the engine. There it goes. We're into 1st gear. And we're away once the Audi driver wakes up. I'm immediately into 2nd gear, immediately into 3rd gear, immediately into 4th gear. Minimum revs, minimum throttle opening. It's a 50 limit, but I'm not in a rush to get up to 50. I'm in 5th gear now at 35. Small throttle openings, building the speed up gradually. Notice it's uphill here, so I don't want to really hammer it up this hill because that's going to use more fuel than I need to. So I'm going to leave it in 5th until we're cresting the hill, and we'll change up into 6th. So we drop downhill the other side, then the speed will pick up to about 50 miles an hour. Now I'm never letting the revs drop down to the point where the engine labours. We don't want the engine labouring. We're just above that point, just above tick over as much as we can do. So here we are, 40, 41. We'll use gravity here just to build the speed of the car up. And then once we're closer to that 50 mile an hour limit, I'll just maintain that speed with a very, very gentle throttle on. 58, 60 miles to the gallon on the instant readout on the dashboard. Gentle, constant throttle. Here the road's going very slightly uphill. but I'm just maintaining that 45, 47 miles an hour as we go uphill. Just one other little tip as well, turn your air conditioning off. So the air conditioning works off a compressor that's driven from the engine. If you switch it off, you disconnect that compressor from the drive of the engine. It just makes the engine a little bit more efficient. It doesn't make a huge difference, just a few percentage points, but if the weather conditions allow for it, turn the air conditioning off. One tip though, don't just turn it off and leave it off forever. If there's one thing that ruins air conditioning systems in cars, it's leaving them switched off and not using them regularly. So you should use them regularly even through winter, because they're good at drying the air that comes into the cabin even when it's cold. So you can use it with the heater to dry the air. It stops the car from steaming up. So regularly turn it on and give it a run every now and again. But if you want to save a bit of fuel, switch your air conditioning off. So I've done a little circuit of about, what, 15, 18 miles, something like that, over the West Pennine Moors, up over Rivington, over towards Chorley, back towards Bolton now through Belmont. And I've just been putting all these little tips into practice. I'm going to coast in gear now through Belmont Village. Gives me some free miles down the hill. Gravity's giving us the free miles. And without trying too hard, I've managed to achieve an average of, well, it's clicking up a little bit now as we go down here. I think by the time we get to the bottom of the hill, it'll be 46 miles to the gallon in a 2-litre turbo Mini Cooper JCW high performance car. When I reset the average fuel economy, it was on about 30. So that's what me and Mrs. Local have achieved just through normal driving without trying too hard to either use lots of fuel or to save lots of fuel. So I've managed to achieve in excess of a 50% improvement in fuel economy in this car just by putting those little driving tips into place. As we get to the bottom of the hill now, it's just tipping over 47 miles to the gallon. I'll leave it in fourth now just to help pull it up the hill a little bit, and that miles per gallon figure will drop a little bit. But 47, 48 miles to the gallon in a car like this, I think is pretty impressive. It probably won't impress those of you that drive turbo diesels, definitely won't impress electric vehicle drivers, but it's a real improvement over what we would normally get in this car. So, hope you've got something from that, hope you've learned something. If you've got any questions, stick them in the comments below. Try these techniques out, see how they work for you. Let me know in the comments section how much fuel you saved or how your fuel economy is improved by using these techniques. So thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed the video and you haven't already, subscribe to the channel please and give us a thumbs up. Go have a look at the website reglocal.com, loads more information there about advanced and performance driving and riding, and give us a follow on Twitter as well, @reglocal. But for now, thanks very much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.